A peaceful afternoon in the park takes a dark turn when two officers confront a man and his dog. What starts as an ordinary walk quickly spirals into a life-or-death standoff. Tensions rise, guns are drawn, and just when the situation reaches its breaking point, the dog does something no one expected. It is an act of loyalty that shocks everyone and changes the course of the day forever. The park was alive with the sounds of life. Children's laughter drifting from the playground, the rhythmic pounding of joggers' feet on the trail, and the occasional bark of dogs playing in the open field. The golden rays of the late afternoon sun cast long, soft shadows on the neatly trimmed grass, making the scene picturesque and serene. Isaiah leaned against a wooden bench near the pond, his fingers lightly gripping the leash of his German Shepherd, Ranger. The dog sat at his feet, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings as though on patrol. Even now, in retirement, Ranger's discipline was apparent. His ears twitched at every sound, and his tail swished lazily against the ground. Isaiah couldn't help but smile as he looked down at his companion. "Still got your sharp senses, huh, boy?" Isaiah said, scratching behind Ranger's ear. The dog turned his head and gave a soft, approving woof, his expressive brown eyes full of affection. Isaiah reached into his bag, pulling out a worn frisbee. "All right, let's stretch those legs," he said, rising to his feet. Ranger's body tensed with anticipation, his tail wagging with controlled excitement. The frisbee soared through the air, glinting in the sunlight. Ranger bolted after it, his powerful strides eating up the ground beneath him. Isaiah marveled at the dog's grace, watching as Ranger leapt effortlessly to catch the disc mid-flight. As the dog trotted back, holding the frisbee proudly in his jaws, Isaiah couldn't help but feel a pang of gratitude. Ranger wasn't just his pet. He was his protector, his partner, and his closest friend. Isaiah had adopted Ranger a year ago after the dog had retired from the police force. The transition hadn't been easy. Ranger had arrived at Isaiah's home with scars, both physical and emotional, but over time, they had formed an unbreakable bond. For Isaiah, who often felt the weight of the world pressing against him, Ranger was a reminder of loyalty and strength. "Good boy," Isaiah praised as Ranger dropped the frisbee at his feet. He ruffled the dog's fur before throwing the disc again. Ranger darted off, his shadow stretching long across the green grass. Isaiah's gaze wandered as he waited for Ranger to return. Across the park, families picnicked under the shade of tall oaks, their laughter blending with the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. A jogger passed by, nodding politely at Isaiah, who returned the gesture with a small smile. For a moment, everything felt perfect, peaceful even. But then Isaiah noticed something. Two police officers were parked a short distance away, their cruiser angled awkwardly on the curb. The officers sat inside, their eyes trained on the park. At first, Isaiah thought little of it. Cops patrolled the park regularly. It was part of their job. Still, a twinge of unease crept into his chest when he realized their eyes lingered on him a little too long. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head, leaned forward, saying something to his partner while gesturing in Isaiah's direction. His partner, a wiry man with a mustache, nodded, his expression unreadable. Isaiah shifted his weight and looked down at Ranger, who had returned with the frisbee. The dog dropped it at Isaiah's feet, but didn't sit this time. Instead, Ranger stood tall, his ears perked and his gaze fixed on the police cruiser. He had noticed them too. "Easy, boy," Isaiah murmured, bending to pick up the frisbee. "They're just doing their job." But even as he said it, his voice lacked conviction. He had lived in this town long enough to recognize the subtle signs, the way the officers stared not with casual curiosity, but with suspicion. It was the kind of look he had seen too many times before, a look that made the air feel heavier and the space around him smaller. "Isaiah, don't start imagining things," he muttered to himself, tossing the frisbee again. Ranger bounded off, his focus momentarily diverted. The sound of approaching footsteps drew Isaiah's attention. An elderly woman, dressed in a beige cardigan and clutching a small purse, was walking briskly in his direction. Her face was set in a frown, her eyes darting between Isaiah and the officers. "Young man," she said sharply as she stopped a few feet away, "I saw what you did to that jogger. You nearly made her fall." Isaiah blinked, startled. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am." "You and that dog of yours," she said, her voice rising. "You were running around, and she tripped because of you. I saw it." Isaiah opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself. He had been sitting on the bench the entire time. Ranger hadn't gone near anyone except to chase the frisbee. He glanced around, hoping the jogger might still be nearby to clear up the misunderstanding, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Ma'am, I assure you, I didn't. Don't you lie to me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the calm of the park. "I'm calling the police." Before Isaiah could say another word, she spun on her heel and marched toward the officers. Isaiah sighed, running a hand over his face. Ranger trotted back with the frisbee, dropping it at Isaiah's feet before looking up at him expectantly. "Looks like playtime's over, bud," Isaiah said softly, his tone heavy with unease. Ranger tilted his head, sensing the shift in Isaiah's mood. Isaiah straightened and gave a small tug on the leash. "Come on, let's go." But before they could take a step, the officers stepped out of their cruiser. Their movements were deliberate, their eyes cold and calculating. Isaiah's pulse quickened as they approached, their hands resting lightly on their belts. "Sir, we need to talk to you," said the taller officer, his voice sharp and authoritative. Isaiah swallowed hard, tightening his grip on Ranger's leash. The peaceful afternoon had shattered, replaced by a tension that coiled around him like a vice. Ranger stood by his side, his body rigid, his eyes locked on the approaching officers. And for the first time that day, Isaiah felt the weight of the storm he had hoped to avoid. Isaiah kept his posture calm, though his heart pounded against his ribs. Ranger's stance mirrored his own, a mix of readiness and restraint. The officers stopped a few feet away, their imposing presence casting long shadows in the golden light. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Isaiah greeted, keeping his voice even. "Is there a problem?" The taller officer, Blake, crossed his arms over his chest, his expression unreadable but intimidating. "We got a complaint about you causing a disturbance," he said flatly. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Isaiah frowned, but kept his tone polite. "Just playing with my dog, officer. I've been here most of the afternoon, and I don't think I've disturbed anyone." Blake's eyes flicked to Ranger, who stood tall and unwavering. "That's your dog?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Yes, sir. His name's Ranger. He's a retired K-9. Blake raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "That right? He's got training then." "He does," Isaiah replied cautiously. "He's very disciplined and doesn't pose a threat to anyone." The shorter officer, Thompson, stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. His eyes darted between Isaiah and Ranger, narrowing with suspicion. "Funny. We heard he was running around scaring people." Isaiah tensed, but he refused to let anger seep into his voice. "That's not true. Ranger hasn't approached anyone except me. You're welcome to ask anyone here." Blake's gaze hardened. "We're not here to play detective, mister." Isaiah stated his name, Isaiah Carter, his jaw tightening slightly. "Well, Mr. Carter," Blake continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "we're here because someone felt threatened. And when someone feels threatened, we take it seriously." Isaiah held his ground, his fists clenching at his sides. "I understand that, officer, but I haven't done anything wrong. Neither has my dog." Thompson's lips twisted into a smirk. "So, you're saying the lady's lying?" "I'm saying there's been a misunderstanding," Isaiah replied firmly, though his patience was wearing thin. Blake stepped closer, towering over Isaiah. "Misunderstanding or not, you need to show some ID." Isaiah's stomach sank. He knew the drill, knew that refusing would escalate the situation, but the unfairness of it burned in his chest. He sighed, reaching into his back pocket. Ranger growled softly, sensing Isaiah's discomfort. "Easy, Ranger," Isaiah murmured, his voice steady as he handed his ID to Blake. Blake examined the card with exaggerated scrutiny before handing it back. "Stay here," he barked, turning to confer with Thompson. The two officers spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to Isaiah and Ranger every few seconds. Isaiah stood still, trying to project calm, though every muscle in his body was taut with tension. "What do you think, boy?" he said softly, glancing at Ranger. "Feels like trouble, doesn't it?" Ranger whined quietly in response, his tail low but swishing gently against Isaiah's leg. It was a small reassurance, but it helped Isaiah steady himself. The officers finished their whispered conversation and returned, their expressions even more severe. "All right," Blake said, his hand resting on his belt. "We've got a few more questions." Isaiah tilted his head slightly. "About what?" "About why your dog looks so aggressive," Thompson interjected, his eyes narrowing at Ranger. Isaiah blinked, disbelief washing over him. Aggressive? He's standing here quietly. He hasn't done anything. He's growling. Thompson pointed out, as if that was a crime. He's growling because he's protective. Isaiah shot back, his voice sharper now. That doesn't make him aggressive. Blake's hand shifted to the butt of his holstered gun. Sir, we don't want to escalate this. Control your dog. Isaiah's chest tightened. Ranger is under control, he said through clenched teeth. He's trained to respond to commands. He's not going to attack anyone. But Blake wasn't listening. He took a step closer, his body language tense and defensive. Let me make something clear. If that dog so much as twitches, I'll put him down. Isaiah's breath caught. A cold, seething anger surged through him, but he fought to keep his composure. That won't be necessary, he said tightly. Ranger is not a threat. Thompson's smirk returned. We'll see about that. The tension was suffocating now, the air charged with hostility. Ranger growled again, louder this time, his stance rigid and his eyes locked on Blake. Isaiah crouched slightly, placing a hand on Ranger's back. Ranger, stand down, he said quietly but firmly. The dog obeyed, lowering his growl to a soft rumble. Still, he didn't take his eyes off the officers. Blake snorted. Yeah, real under control. Isaiah straightened, his jaw tight. What do you want from me, officers? I've answered your questions. I've shown you my ID. Are you going to arrest me for walking my dog? Blake's face darkened, his pride clearly stung. Don't get smart with me, he snapped. You're lucky we're just talking. Lucky? Isaiah repeated, his voice rising slightly. I'm lucky that you're harassing me in a public park for no reason. Blake's hand twitched, and Isaiah saw it. A flicker of intent, a subtle movement toward his weapon. Ranger saw it too. The dog's growl returned, low and menacing. Sir, I'm warning you, Blake said, his voice colder now. Control your dog. Isaiah held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice trembling with both anger and fear. Ranger is controlled. You're the ones escalating this. But Blake wasn't listening. His hand moved toward his gun, and the world seemed to slow. Isaiah felt his breath hitch, his muscles tense as adrenaline surged through him. And that's when Ranger moved. With a sudden burst of energy, the dog stepped in front of Isaiah, placing his body squarely between his owner and the officers. He didn't lunge, didn't bark, didn't attack. He simply stood tall and unyielding, a shield of muscle and fur. His growl deepened, a clear warning that he would not allow harm to come to Isaiah. For a moment, everything froze. The officers stared at Ranger, their hands hovering over their weapons. Isaiah held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. The storm was about to break. Time seemed to stretch as Isaiah stood frozen behind Ranger, his chest tight with fear and anger. The air felt thick, heavy with tension, as if the world were holding its breath. Ranger stood his ground, unmoving, his powerful frame a silent declaration of protection. The dog's low, steady growl was the only sound, vibrating through the stillness like a warning bell. Call him off. Officer Blake barked, his voice cracking under the pressure. His hand hovered near his holstered weapon, his body tense and ready to draw. Isaiah's voice was calm but firm, cutting through the charged air. I don't need to call him off. He's standing still. He hasn't attacked, and he won't. But if you keep pushing, I can't promise he'll stay quiet. Blake's eyes flicked to Thompson, who was visibly uneasy. He's growling. That's enough of a threat. Thompson snapped, his hand also edging toward his gun. Isaiah took a deep breath, his tone steady but with an edge of steel. Listen to me carefully. Ranger is trained not to attack unless commanded. He's not attacking. He's not even moving. He's only protecting me because he senses your aggression. If you lower your hands, I'll have him relax. Ranger's growl continued, steady and unwavering. His sharp eyes darted between the two officers, reading their movements with the precision of a seasoned protector. Isaiah felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. His dog's bravery was undeniable, but the situation was teetering on the edge of disaster. Blake sneered, his pride clearly bruised. Don't tell me how to do my job, he growled, his hand gripping the butt of his weapon. Isaiah's voice sharpened, his patience fraying. And don't force me into a situation where you make a mistake you can't take back. The standoff might have spiraled further if not for the unexpected voice that cut through the tension like a knife. What the hell is going on here? The voice was deep and commanding, carrying the weight of authority. All eyes turned toward the source, a tall, older man in plain clothes walking toward them with purposeful strides. His posture radiated confidence, and there was an unmistakable edge to his gaze. Isaiah recognized him immediately. It was Captain Matthew Carter, a retired police officer and former K-9 handler. The man had a reputation as a fair but no-nonsense leader during his time on the force. Isaiah had met him once briefly during a local event for police retirees. More importantly, Carter knew Ranger, had worked with him during the dog's active years. Blake and Thompson straightened, their aggression faltering under Carter's piercing gaze. "Captain," Blake stammered, clearly caught off guard. "I know exactly what this is," Carter interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. He stopped a few feet away, his sharp eyes assessing the situation in seconds. "You've got a trained, retired K-9 standing his ground because you two idiots decided to escalate instead of de-escalate," Thompson sputtered. "But sir, the dog hasn't moved a damn inch." Carter snapped, his voice rising. "And unless I'm mistaken, that growl isn't aggression, it's restraint. If this dog wanted to attack, you'd already know it." Blake bristled. He was being uncooperative. "No, you were being unprofessional," Carter cut in, stepping closer. "Do you even know who this dog is? That's Ranger. He served with distinction for years. I oversaw some of his training myself. And this man," he gestured toward Isaiah, "is his owner, who's done nothing but stand here calmly while you two act like rookies itching for a fight." Blake's face flushed with embarrassment, and Thompson shifted uncomfortably, his hand moving away from his weapon. Isaiah finally allowed himself to exhale, though his hand remained steady on Ranger's back. "Captain Carter," Isaiah said, his voice steady but laced with gratitude, "I appreciate you stepping in." Carter gave him a small nod before turning back to the officers. "You two are done here. Get back in your cruiser and leave this man and his dog alone." Now, Blake opened his mouth as if to argue, but quickly thought better of it. "Yes, sir," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. Thompson followed suit, casting one last glance at Ranger before the two officers retreated to their car. They drove off without another word, the tension dissipating in their wake. Isaiah sank onto the bench, his legs finally giving way as the adrenaline drained from his body. Ranger sat beside him, his growl fading into a soft whine. Isaiah leaned forward, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did so good, Ranger." Carter approached, his expression softening. "You all right?" Isaiah nodded, though his hands still trembled slightly. "Yeah, thanks to you and Ranger." Carter crouched, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "He's a damn good dog. Always has been." He looked up at Isaiah. "You're lucky to have him." "I know," Isaiah said, his voice steadying. "I don't think I'd still be standing if it weren't for him." Carter stood, his gaze turning serious. "Isaiah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Not all of us are like them, but I know that doesn't make it any easier." Isaiah met his eyes, seeing the sincerity in them. "I know, Captain. I appreciate that you stepped in when you did." Carter nodded. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call me. And take care of this guy." He gave Ranger one last pat before turning to leave. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Isaiah sat with Ranger for a long time. The park slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. For the first time since the confrontation began, he allowed himself to relax, leaning into the quiet strength of his loyal companion. "Let's go home, boy," Isaiah finally said, rising to his feet. Ranger wagged his tail, ready to follow wherever Isaiah led. Together, they walked away from the chaos, the bond between them stronger than ever. The walk home was slow and deliberate. The evening air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. Isaiah held Ranger's leash loosely, trusting the dog to follow his lead without needing much guidance. Ranger's calm demeanor was a balm to Isaiah's frayed nerves, and with each step, the tension from the encounter at the park began to ease. When they reached Isaiah's modest house, a single-story brick home tucked into a quiet neighborhood, Isaiah opened the gate and let Ranger trot ahead into the yard. The dog sniffed around briefly before turning to sit on the porch, waiting for his owner to join him. Isaiah paused at the door, looking out at the quiet street. The events of the day replayed in his mind. The tension, the fear, the anger, and the relief when Captain Carter stepped in. His hands tightened into fists at the memory of Blake's sneer, the officer's hand hovering over his gun, and the unspoken threat it carried. "Come on, Isaiah," he muttered to himself. "Let it go." He opened the door and stepped inside, the familiar warmth of home wrapping around him like a protective cocoon. Ranger followed, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Isaiah dropped his keys on the small table by the door and leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. Ranger sat in front of him, his intelligent eyes watching Isaiah closely. The dog's head tilted slightly, as if he could sense the turmoil still churning in his owner's chest. "You always know, don't you?" Isaiah said softly, kneeling down to scratch behind Ranger's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, his tail wagging gently. "You knew I needed you today." Ranger responded with a low, contented rumble, his version of a thank you. Isaiah chuckled, the sound breaking the lingering tension. "Let's get you some dinner, hero," Isaiah said, standing and heading towards the kitchen. Ranger followed, his tail swaying lazily. Isaiah filled Ranger's bowl with kibble, adding a few pieces of cooked chicken as a treat. The dog sniffed eagerly before digging in, his tail wagging faster as he ate. Isaiah leaned against the counter, watching him with a small smile. "Saved my life today," he murmured. "Don't think I'll ever forget that." Ranger glanced up briefly, as if acknowledging the comment, before returning to his meal. Isaiah turned to his own dinner, a simple sandwich and a glass of water. His appetite wasn't strong, but the act of eating gave him something to focus on. As they finished their meals, Isaiah moved to the living room and settled onto the couch. Ranger followed, hopping up to sit beside him. The dog rested his head on Isaiah's lap, and Isaiah absent-mindedly stroked his fur, the repetitive motion soothing both of them. Isaiah's gaze drifted to the small bookshelf across the room. On one of the shelves sat a framed photo of Ranger from his days as a K-9 officer. In the picture, Ranger stood tall, his stance proud and confident, with a badge clipped to his collar. Next to it was a certificate of commendation honoring Ranger for his service and bravery. Isaiah had found Ranger by chance, or maybe it had been fate. After years of service, Ranger had been retired due to an injury, a deep scar that ran along his hind leg, a reminder of a confrontation that could have ended his life. When Isaiah first met him at the shelter, the dog had been reserved and cautious, as though the world had taken more from him than it had given. But something in Ranger had called to Isaiah. Maybe it was the quiet resilience in the dog's eyes, or the way he had leaned forward just slightly when Isaiah knelt to greet him. Whatever it was, that day had changed both their lives. Isaiah looked down at Ranger, who was now dozing lightly, his breath slow and steady. "I don't know what I'd do without you, boy," Isaiah said softly. The living room grew darker as the evening deepened. Isaiah didn't bother turning on the lights, letting the soft glow of the street lamp outside filter through the curtains. The stillness of the house felt comforting now, a stark contrast to the chaos of the park. But his thoughts kept circling back to the confrontation. He replayed every moment, from the officer's arrival to their escalating aggression and the moment Ranger had stepped in front of him. That single act of bravery had changed everything. Ranger had seen the danger before Isaiah had fully understood it, and he had acted without hesitation. The thought filled Isaiah with both gratitude and a quiet sense of awe. Ranger wasn't just a pet. He was family, a partner, and a protector. Isaiah's chest tightened as he realized how close they had come to disaster and how much worse it could have been if not for Ranger's intervention. "I owe you, Ranger," Isaiah whispered, "more than I can ever repay." The dog stirred at the sound of his name, his tail thumping lightly against the couch. Isaiah chuckled, his hand finding Ranger's fur once more. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Isaiah made a silent promise to himself. He couldn't let what happened today go unanswered. Captain Carter's intervention had been a blessing, but Isaiah knew he needed to take steps to protect himself and others like him from similar encounters. Tomorrow, he would reach out to Carter. Maybe there was a way to use Ranger's story, a story of courage and loyalty, to foster understanding and change. Maybe there was a way to ensure that no one else would have to face what they had faced today. For now, though, Isaiah allowed himself to rest. Ranger's steady breathing was a comfort, a reminder that despite everything, they had made it through the day together. "Good night, hero," Isaiah murmured, his eyes drifting closed as Ranger's warmth anchored him to the moment. The morning sun streamed through the thin curtains of Isaiah's living room, casting warm light on the couch where he had fallen asleep. Ranger was already awake, sitting by the door and watching the street as if standing guard. The sight made Isaiah smile as he stretched and sat up. "Morning, buddy," he said groggily, rubbing his face. Ranger's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and his tail wagged in acknowledgement. Isaiah knew he had work to do today, work that extended beyond his usual routines. The events of yesterday still lingered in his mind, and with them, the knowledge that something needed to change. After a quick breakfast, Isaiah made a call to Captain Carter. He had the retired officer's number saved from a community event months earlier, where Carter had spoken about bridging the gap between police and the communities they served. The phone rang twice before Carter answered. "This is Carter." "Captain, it's Isaiah Carter," Isaiah said, his voice steady but serious. "We met at the park yesterday." Carter's tone softened immediately. "Isaiah, how are you holding up?" "I'm okay," Isaiah said, glancing at Ranger, who was lying at his feet. "I wanted to thank you again for stepping in. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "You don't need to thank me," Carter replied. "I just did what those two should have done in the first place. De-escalate." Isaiah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I was wondering if we could meet. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I feel like there's more we can do." Carter didn't miss a beat. "You're right, there is. Meet me at Sullivan's Diner around noon. We'll talk." "Thank you, Captain. I'll see you then." Isaiah arrived at Sullivan's Diner just before noon. The small restaurant was bustling with the lunch crowd. Carter was already seated at a corner table, sipping coffee and reading a folded newspaper. He waved Isaiah over as he entered. "Glad you could make it," Carter said as Isaiah slid into the seat across from him. "Thanks for meeting with me," Isaiah replied. He gestured toward Ranger, who sat obediently just outside the diner's glass door, tied to a nearby post. "I hope you don't mind. I couldn't leave him at home after yesterday." Carter smiled. "Not at all. Looks like he's keeping an eye on you." Isaiah nodded, his expression growing serious. "Captain, I can't let what happened yesterday go unanswered. I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that kind of bias, and I know I'm not the only one." Carter set down his coffee. "You're right. And the system isn't going to fix itself. That's why it needs people like you, willing to stand up and push back." Isaiah leaned forward. "I don't know where to start, though. I'm just one person. But maybe Ranger's story could help. People trust dogs. They see his bravery and loyalty, and maybe it'll make them think twice about how they treat people like me." Carter considered this, nodding slowly. "It's a good idea. People are more likely to listen when there's a story that pulls at their heartstrings. But it can't just stop there. You need to tie it to action." "What kind of action?" Isaiah asked. "Education," Carter said firmly. "Workshops, outreach programs, anything that brings officers and the community together in a way that builds trust instead of fear. And you can start small, right here in this town." The two spent the next hour brainstorming. Carter shared insights from his years on the force, while Isaiah brought his perspective as someone who had experienced the other side of the badge. Together, they sketched out the beginnings of a program, a series of community events featuring retired K-9s like Ranger to promote understanding and dialogue between the police and the public. "People need to see that there's humanity on both sides," Carter said. "And sometimes, a dog can bridge that gap better than words ever could." Isaiah nodded. "Ranger's already done that for me. He's my protector, my family. Maybe he can help protect others too." As Isaiah and Carter left the diner, Ranger perked up, wagging his tail as Isaiah untied his leash. Just as they were about to part ways, a voice called out from across the street. "Isaiah." Isaiah turned to see a young woman jogging toward them, her expression a mix of concern and relief. It took him a moment to place her. It was the jogger from the park, the one who had tripped near him yesterday. "I'm so glad I ran into you," she said, slightly out of breath. "I was at the park yesterday when those officers showed up. I didn't know what to do, but I saw what happened." Isaiah tensed slightly, his memories of the encounter flashing back. "What do you mean?" I saw how they treated you," she said, her voice heavy with guilt. "And I saw how your dog stood by you. It was incredible. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up then, but if there's anything I can do now." Carter stepped forward, his presence reassuring. "You can share what you saw," he said. "The more people speak up about these incidents, the harder it is to ignore them." She nodded quickly. "Of course. Anything to help." Isaiah's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. That means a lot." As Isaiah walked home with Ranger that afternoon, his steps felt lighter. For the first time since the incident, he felt a sense of direction, a way to channel his anger and fear into something productive. Ranger padded beside him, his head held high, his tail wagging gently. Isaiah reached down to pat the dog's back, a quiet smile spreading across his face. "You and me, buddy," he said softly. "We're going to make a difference." Ranger glanced up at him, his brown eyes full of understanding, as if he knew exactly what lay ahead. Together, they walked forward, partners in a journey toward justice and change. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Isaiah and Captain Carter worked tirelessly to lay the foundation for their initiative, which they called Pause for Justice. The program aimed to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the community, using retired K-9s like Ranger to foster conversations about trust, accountability, and the humanity that should guide policing. Carter tapped into his network of retired officers and dog trainers, while Isaiah worked on spreading the word in the local community. They found a small, eager group of volunteers, neighbors, teachers, and even a few active duty officers willing to participate. Ranger quickly became the face of the program. At their first event, held in a local park, Isaiah introduced Ranger to a small crowd of families, police officers, and community leaders. Standing in front of the group, Isaiah felt a lump in his throat as he began to speak. "Yesterday, I was just another guy walking my dog in the park. Today, I stand here because this dog," he gestured to Ranger, who sat at his side, "reminded me what bravery looks like." Isaiah paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Ranger isn't just my companion. He's a retired K-9, a hero in his own right. But yesterday, when I was in danger, he didn't see a badge or a uniform. He saw me, his family, and he acted." Ranger stood on cue, wagging his tail as Isaiah patted his head. The crowd clapped, and Isaiah continued, his voice steady now. "That's what this program is about. It's about seeing each other, not as threats, but as people. It's about building trust, one step at a time." The crowd erupted in applause, and as Isaiah stepped down, Carter clapped him on the back. "Well said, Isaiah. I think you've got their attention." The event marked the beginning of something larger than Isaiah had imagined. Over the next few months, the program grew steadily. Local schools invited Isaiah and Ranger to speak, using their story as a teaching moment for students. Workshops were held where community members and officers worked together in team-building exercises, often involving the retired K-9s. One memorable moment came when a young boy approached Ranger timidly during a school visit. The boy, who had been nervous around police due to his family's experiences, eventually knelt beside Ranger, stroking his fur. "What's his name?" the boy asked quietly. "Ranger," Isaiah said, kneeling beside him. "He used to be a police dog. Now he's here to help us learn how to trust each other." The boy's face lit up, and Isaiah felt a flicker of hope. "Small steps," he reminded himself. "Change takes time."